Hello, and welcome to another episode of Inspiring Conversations. My name is Ekta Bajaj. I'm the author of the book, The Voice of Kali, and the co-founder of publishing company, Author in Me. This topic today that I'm going to be talking to you about is very close to my heart, something that I deeply, deeply believe, and I'm really affected by it at times. You know, when we see children around us, I'm very close to children. I work with children, of course, but looking at the way we are raising children is sometimes, it brings a little fear in my heart, though I'm a very fearless person, but this thing does, because education system has seen a lot of transition over the years. We have tried to adapt it to different things. We have tried to bring a lot of emotional element to it. We've tried to restructure it many times, but yet the question arises is, are we still trying to create systems which kind of still guides every child to in some way adapt to the system rather than creating a system which adapts to the child individually? And maybe it is time, looking at the levels of anxiety that are rising in younger children, looking at sadly, the increasing rates of suicides in younger children, the increase in the depression in children. Is it time probably to reflect and see if we need to restructure the education system? If we as teachers, as guides, as parents need to just sit back and observe what we are doing. What are we offering to the younger generation? And for today's topic, I am very, very delighted to have Julia Alden with me. I'll just give you a very brief introduction to Julia, and then I'll let her give her own introduction. She is a fabulous person. I met her years back, and there are some people who always stay in your mind, and she's one of those. So Julia is an experienced international primary teacher, curriculum coordinator, and school principal who's now studying and working as a wellbeing practitioner. Her many years of experience in education supports her working with children and teachers to promote positive mental health, social relationships, and emotional well-being across school community. She's particularly interested in conceptualizing and designing a whole school approach to the context of well-being programs. And this is the reason why I'm really excited to have you here, Julia. Thank you so much for being a part of Inspiring Conversations. I will now let you introduce yourself to our listeners.
Thank you, Ekta. So it's great to be here, and it's great to see you again. And so wonderful to see that over the last few years, you've really continued to grow and develop your program. So, you know, you've said a lot in your introduction. Let me just add to myself by saying I have been in education since, oh my goodness, for about 40 years. And my background was starting in the United States, and I was always teaching in inner city schools. But then I went into international education, and I spent most of my career in international education. Well, I retired. I was in Singapore. I was in 5 different countries, so it gave me a very broad overview of education systems around the world. But of course, I was always working with international education. And then when I retired, I came back to London, and I was very interested in this idea of well-being for children in schools. And it came to me because as I was a principal my last 17 years, I started realizing that because obviously principals have this role of being, let's say, the disciplinarian or the person who is taking care of the behavior or those kinds of things, among many other things. So, but I started realizing that when children came to me, what they really wanted was a relationship with me. They really wanted a relationship. They wanted to make a connection. They wanted me to see them and not just what they had done. They wanted me to see them as children. So this really, really motivated me to, when I came back to London after retiring, to actually see if I could further or deepen that understanding of what well-being is like in schools. And what could schools be like if they were really looking at fostering well-being for young children. And I went to the Institute for Arts of Education here in London, and I did 3 years, and I got a certificate. This is just recently in well-being as therapeutic practice. So that means that I am certified to work with individual children or groups of children in this world of well-being therapeutically. So part of that was I worked 2 years in a school in London, in Lambeth, working with individual children, helping them to build their capacity with social emotional skills. But what happened was, as I was doing that, I was thinking I was bringing my total, 35 years of background in schools as an educator with me, and certainly as a person who was working in independent and private schools around the system that we are working in. And what I realized was that I was pulling children out to try to fix them in a way and then sending them back to classes. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. These children need help. And so, but what I understood was that it has to be, well-being has to be connected to the whole system, to the whole school.
Yes.
So while I continued to do that, I also worked in another school along with the supervisor of my program in a whole school program for well-being. But this really sparked my my passion about schools and how they are set up, and how well-being is integral to that, but that schools themselves are a social context where if we don't look very deeply into what we are doing in schools, then well-being is just another added on strategy or an added on idea for everyone in the school. So that's sort of where I am. I'm not working in a school at the moment. I am a authorization person for the IB, the International Baccalaureate for the Primary Use Program. And I go into schools and I'm doing that. And I work with a couple of rural schools in Cambodia as well. But well-being is certainly something that is at the forefront of my interest, but systematically in terms of not just working with children as a pull-out kind of scenario, but what are we doing in schools? And I think that's where the emphasis really has to lie in terms of well-being.
Wow, what a beautiful career you've had, and such rich experiences. And I'm intrigued by the fact that you have worked in different schools in different countries. So, I mean, when you had started, you may have started as a primary teacher without any agenda of actually going into well-being. And maybe you didn't even think this is where your career will lead you.
No.
So at what point in your career did you think, and it just hit you that something's missing? Was it an influence of any international school that you went to?
No, I think that I was very privileged to work in the IB, the International Baccalaureate. The primary years program has a lot of focus on, let's say, inquiry, on autonomy. The new word, of course, is agency, but the PYP, and I'm not plugging the primary years program, but I was already well established in a program that put children at the center of learning. And it really was the story that I was telling you about in terms of the interactions that I was seeing with children and what they were needing. The idea that they needed to feel good about themselves, that they needed to understand themselves. They needed someone to help them build this very essential identity. And so I think it was then the catalyst for me. So that was the catalyst. But then when I came back and I was in some public schools here, or some state schools, as you would call it, I found that there was so much emphasis put on academics and so much pressure on teachers to teach the academics, and everything else was being lost. And then I saw that when I was working with children in a pull-out situation, helping them to build social emotional skills. It was really powerful and it was working well, but often those children would go back into classes and classrooms where they encountered the same kind of problems. They were either being bullied, or they felt that they weren't included, or many of them were already labeled as troublemakers or whatever. And so it was pretty obvious that it wasn't just a problem of an individual well-being issue, but it was a problem of a systemic well-being issue, something that is really embedded in the school systems, many of them. And please, so many schools are really working hard to do. And I totally understand the enormous job that schools have. But I think, and that teachers have, but I think it's really relevant and significant to say that, yeah, we need a transformation, not just a reform or not just putting this in, but we need real transformation in schools. And we have to be asking the deep question, well, what does well-being look like for children? What can we be doing in our school systems to ensure that every single person in the school is benefiting from well-being? And I think that's the essential question that schools have to start with, and then it has to be a really deep dive into what we're doing. Yeah.
You know what? I listening to you, I'm just intrigued. This question's coming in my mind that depression and mental well-being has been in forefront, at least if not in children, for adults since many years. Why has it taken us so long to understand that a depressed grown-up probably had a less nourishing childhood? There was not much focus laid in the emotional well-being of the child. And now we are coming to a point where the schools are probably starting to recognize it. But I still feel that we are probably just plucking the leaves. We are not actually mending the roots. We are not actually doing it. So there's probably just trimming going on. But actual work probably needs to lie. You're right. It is the system. But the system is made out of people who have seen this and understood that, yes, there's a rise in cures. Adults are depressed. I can see that I am also not, in that harmony. So probably it's time to just sit and work on the individuals who are running the system. On that level, the ground level, the teachers, every teacher has to first, maybe the program has to start with the teachers first. They have to be in a state of balance and harmony to be able to bring that in the system. Yeah. Do you think so?
Well, I definitely think so. And I think that, the issue that you're bringing up is so, it's not only, it's political, it's economic, it's all of these things are connected. But I think that you're right. It's about going to the very, very heart of what we believe about what education should be. And I think we have to take on a much deeper understanding of what education is. And things are changing, and there is a lot of work around well-being in schools, and social emotional learning is now being implemented. But again, it goes back to this whole school thing. If you, for example, have mindfulness classes in your school, which is very important, it's very important. But if then children are always in a very competitive situation, or they're rushed to do everything, and they are trying to struggle through all the stuff that they have to. The same for teachers. If teachers don't have time and space, if they don't have a balance, if they don't have in their work environment this environment where they can, talk about these issues and understand them deeply, then it really doesn't, as you say, it's just a surface kind of thing.
Yes.
So, I'm all for, mindfulness and all kinds of things. And in fact, I used them extensively when I was working with the children in the school. But I think it has to go deeper than that. And what you're talking about right now is so important, because we're talking about not just the success and well-being of an individual, but of our society. Yes. Because, as you're saying, we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis. And the moment I think that we really stop and say, yes, we are, so let's go very deeply into this. And I think that one of the things that maybe I didn't put into my my stuff that I sent you, but I took some courses even during the time that I was doing this therapeutic certificate. I was taking some courses through Geelong Grammar School, because they are the ones that initiated positive education. So they had Martin Seligman come some years ago, and he helped them to develop this positive education program. And that's just one idea, one framework, I should say, of how they are taking ideas around well-being and they're implementing them throughout the school as a whole school approach. So it's about relationships, how we work together. It's about the physical environment. It's about the context in which you are in a school. It's about how students are engaged. What does learning look like? So they're actually not saying, okay, well, if we do mindfulness for students, that will help them with their well-being. They're actually breaking it down and saying, what are the important concepts around well-being? Well, it's definitely about how we treat each other. It's how we work out our conflicts. It's how our environment looks, how safe and comfortable we are, how our students learn, how much autonomy do they have, how much voice do they have. It's all of those things. So when you start looking at this kind of whole school approach where everyone is looking at it, it's very different. And that's a journey that takes
a long way to go, isn't it?
It's a long way to go. There's a very, very wonderful book that I also I just use this all the time. It's by a woman called Dr. Helen Street in Australia, and she wrote a book on contextual well-being, creating positive schools from the inside out.
Yes.
From the inside out.
Which is the right approach, I suppose. That's in my opinion, that's what we are missing. We are again and again telling children how to manage relationship, how to be more tolerant. But that's something, because I'm a complete believer and advocate of self-empowerment. In my opinion, once you understand that everything that is happening to you, everything that's happening around you stems out of your own limitations or your own strengths, and the whole responsibility of dealing with it lies on you, but of course with a lot of love and compassion. But aren't we missing telling children this? I mean, I find it very like I said, it's a very big, it really hurts me when I see that. For parents, we have parenting tips, we have parenting classes, how to be good parents, how to be very tolerant, all those things. But the moment we send the kids to school, it's like confusing this child's brain because in the school it's very much timed. Everything is timed. Everything is very, very technical. And yes, we are saying you've got to be tolerant, but it's
yes,
not telling them that you've got to
yes,
observe within.
yeah,
What's the world within you? Who are you?
yeah,
What are
yeah,
your skills?
yeah,
What is your strength? And use your strength to expand in the world, and automatically the tolerance will come, because that respect will come. I'm good in my skills, the other person is good in the other skills. You think that we are lacking that initial foundation of building a deeper self-awareness in the children?
Oh, I definitely believe that. I think that we started in that space where we were talking about children need to know themselves. I think this is really fundamental. And how do children, how do they learn about themselves? How do they understand themselves? And how do they, it's by what you're saying, it's by understanding what their strengths are. Who am I? What can I do well? What can maybe I need to improve on? And I think positive education has at it's one of its really integral parts. It's this strengths-based approach. And it's really true that what you find in a lot of education is a deficit model. You're not doing this right. You're not doing that right. You need to improve on this. You need to improve on that. But before we do that, we need to allow a young person to understand what they do well,
yes,
and build them in this way. And I think, the other thing that you talk about, self-observation, which I guess I kind of call that from my work in schools with the primary years program, is self-reflection. So this idea of and it can be brought about by many things, by mindfulness, but it can be brought about by journaling. It can absolutely be brought about by young people setting goals for themselves. How did I do on this? Evaluating themselves. All these different areas that help them to build this concept of who am I before they have to start being torn down.
Before they start learning the alphabets, I think the first year of the education, the primary education, should be a lot of focus, at least the first 6 months, should focus on the individuality, on who you are and your strengths, and the things, that amazing things that you can do building on those strengths, the imagination, storytelling, hearing stories, learning from stories. And I think that's just a very tiny, storytelling just becomes a ritual just before the school is about to end. We're just going to read a story. It's not used as a tool.
Well, I think that I would go so far as to say that we have to do that in every single age of the child. You can't stop that. It has to continue on. But once you have a strong, once you build that with young children, then it just becomes stronger and stronger. There is another. So once I saw that for me, well-being was not just intervention with children who have mental illness or mental health problems or behavioral problems, and started looking then at this idea of, well, what would we have in schools? What would there be? It's very multidimensional. It's how children learn, but I started looking at different things that are in schools that actually do this kind of self-identity, positive building, strengths building. And positive education was one. Another one is developed by a woman called Sue Roffey. She worked in Australia for a long time, but she's in London. And she developed something called Circle Solutions.
Solutions.
Yeah, and you can use it with very young children all the way through to high school, secondary students. And this is where you develop all these things through this way that you come together in a circle and you discuss these issues. You discuss issues of conflict, you discuss issues of kindness, of caring, and you use the students' real practical world in doing that. And they learn through each other, how to talk to each other, how to respect one another, and it's a very, very, very strong program but of course, the whole school has to do it. So you can do it in your classroom, but if you do it with the whole school, it's also extremely important. So you're learning how to build relationships, you're learning how to solve your problems, you're learning with the teacher as facilitator, what your strengths are, what your capacities. Yeah. Yes. And I think it makes an enormous difference when you take on something like that. Children start really wanting to treat each other well. They really want to make sure that they have a voice. They really want to make sure that they're being heard and that they're working through their problems at the age appropriate level together. So it's not the teacher saying, I'm sorry, you need to be tolerant. You need to be resilient. And resilience looks like this. It's actually coming together in a very real and authentic way to bring forth these issues that, and these, actually they're virtues in a way, these virtues and values that is what we need to become resilient as children.
What does it mean to be resilient? Probably.
Yeah.
So good, yeah.
So I would, and I'm not here to push any program forward. It's just, I'm just sharing what in my own research, some of the things that I see that do work in schools that can actually, as we've been talking about, transform the social context where we have a whole school of collaboration. We have a whole school of people working to treat one another well. We have a whole school of people helping each other to be resilient, to work through issues, to dialogue together. So it is a big task. There's no doubt about it.
Yes.
But for me, having spent my whole life in education and then having come at the end of my career into this area of well-being, it just was a natural kind of outcome for me, is the saying, well, okay, all right, if we really want to do this, and if we really want to make a difference, then we've got to go way, way down deep into what are we doing here? And that would be true in families, in all kinds of relationships. It's really the same. It's really the same thing.
Yeah. And it's very interesting, because if someone like you is coming to the point here and saying that, guys, we really need to look at the education and see well-being as an integral part of it, then definitely there is a huge need. Now, you have been to different international schools in different countries. Have you seen any system, any different way of education there, something that told you, well, wow, this is different and this really works? Or is education system the same everywhere?
That's a great question. I always, except for in Nepal, I worked in a local school for 1 year. I was a volunteer principal for 1 year in a very, very marginalized school for marginalized children. And but I did have an opportunity in different countries here in England, Singapore, Bangladesh, Nepal, and Italy. Also, I was in Italy. And I have to say that the Reggio Emilia early years framework is excellent. They really do put the child at the center of what they are doing. Now, that's just an early childhood program. Have you heard of Reggio Emilia?
No, I was about to ask.
Very strong, very strong. And you will find that it is driven by constant dialogue around how do we make sure that our children are okay and that they're engaged in their learning and that they're part of it and that it's meaningful for them and that they're growing as individuals who understand themselves. Another interesting school that I just visited virtually, because all my school visits are virtual now, was a Rudolf Steiner School, Waldorf Steiner School in Spain. So my job is I go in and we have our international standards. And so we are looking at schools in terms of whether or not they meet the standards and just helping them to set action plans for the future. And this Steiner School would be virtually one of the first schools that would ever be asking for this international certification. Now, Steiner schools are international, but this is the international schools certification. And I'd always been interested in Steiner schools. I had a godchild who went to Waldorf Steiner schools, and it is a system, a philosophy of ethics that puts that the development of the self first, the development of the self first.
I resonate so much with that.
Yes. And I think that, we were there for about a week, and then we got to virtually see the classrooms and the children and how they interacted and how the teachers interacted. And, they really do put that first. We care first about how you are. And if you are okay, then you will learn better. You'll be able to learn better. And I think this has to be one of the I would say biggest focus of well-being, is this idea that well-being has to be about how I can flourish and how I can flourish in this social context or in this system. So that really means that, and I think the Steiner schools, they, I can't say that they have everything right. I don't totally agree with everything, but they certainly have that right. This idea of we want to develop you, how you feel about yourself, how comfortable you are here in this environment. So those are, and again, I have to say the Geelong Grammar School. Do you know that in Australia?
No.
It's GEELONG in grammar. And they've used the positive education framework from Martin Seligman to create a framework around well-being for the whole school.
Wow.
And again, some of the schools that are using the Circle Solutions by Sue Rafi, they are making a real whole school effort at well-being. And then I'm also connected with something you may have heard of, is called the Virtues Project.
I think I have somewhere Googled and heard about it.
Yeah, I think the Virtues Project, the virtues get a bad rap because people associate virtues with religion.
Religion, yes.
But actually, virtues go way back to...
Yes.
And
I think it was more around spiritual parenting where I kind of fumbled over it.
Yes, exactly. Spiritual parenting.
Yes.
And they have now begun to go into schools and certify schools, because when you use the strategies, and those 5 strategies are really touch upon everything. So they touch upon the language that we use with children. They touch upon boundaries for children, how to develop yourself through the virtues. So it goes through a whole process of building, building yourself, building this identity, flourishing, doing well, doing good. And so again, and they do it as a whole school. So those are kind of the sort of areas that I see where well-being is flourishing. And of course, there are many schools, I think, that are really working to implement things in the schools. But they have to, as you say, they have to be very careful that it's not just an add-on, and that they haven't really done this inquiry very deeply about, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, isn't it? When we are telling a child, like you were saying, about this school that lets children discuss these things amongst themselves. So we have to, I think the first step is to let the child be at ease with himself
Yes.
or herself,
Yes.
then be at ease with the group.
Yes. Yes.
And that is the class.
Yes.
Then be at ease with a larger group, maybe another 2 or 3 class, and then the world. But when we, when we're teaching, the education system suddenly teaches us things that are applicable straight to the world. So it's an abstract concept for the child, because for the child, the world is here, what he can see. The child has not gone on internet. The child has not got no knowledge of what the world means, like what does it comprise of. So for that child, if that child is at ease with the world that he can feel, then gradually that easiness, that thing will just melt away in other horizons. That's what I feel. And here, I think the role of parents becomes very important as well. I mean, we can do as much as we can do in the school.
Yes.
But then parents, they need to be in the same boat as well. They need to understand that schools are not a place to compete amongst each other.
Yes.
On a parental level, or make a trophy child of it, that kind of a thing. It has to be a place where you have to allow the child to just expand in knowledge and not just become an intelligent person. Yes, you know all your maths formulas. Yes, you know all the science formulas. But what about the expansion in knowledge and wisdom?
You're absolutely right about that. And this idea of competition is such an interesting one, because everything already is built on competition in schools, and some competition is good in sports and things like that, but not about who we are and not about what we know. And we need to really downplay that. And interestingly, this program that I worked on, and the primary years program, which is in international schools. But by the way, there are many, many schools now that are taking on the primary years program. And many schools in India as well are doing that program as well. But it's interesting that we in that program, there's a very different way of working, and it's very much based on inquiry. It's very much based on getting the students to be independent learners and making choices about how they learn, what they learn. Big journey. And parents at times are so bewildered. What? I want the teacher who is standing up in front of the class and giving that knowledge to the student, and, get all the books, and, they can regurgitate that and all of that. This is so totally different from that. It's about how we learn, how we come to the learning process, how we ourselves become these agents of our own learning, our own, way forward in what's interesting and to us, which doesn't mean we don't learn how to read or do math or anything like that, but it's just so enriching in this way. And we actually have to bring the parents in constantly and consistently to say, this is the way that we are learning here. This is the way that your child is learning here. And you will begin to see the differences. And that's my job now. That's what I do. I go into these schools That's my job as a consultant. And we are evaluating the schools that are putting the program in place. And we have to talk with the parents as well. How do you know that this program is working? Oh, they just talk about, they know about it. They see their children passionate about it. They see their children, engaged, asking questions, wanting to learn more. And so part of the whole process is whatever you're doing in schools, you have to also bring the parents along with you.
Yes.
And you can do that. You can, and they will be in the beginning. Maybe they'll be bewildered or what, that's not, but they will learn that this is wonderful for them too. And they will come along with you and be doing that with you. So yeah, it is so important to have the parents.
When we started doing our story writing sessions, and initially parents didn't really understand. It took us a lot of time to convince them that this is as essential as any other English, math, science that you do, because of course we are teaching tools how to write, but it's beyond that. It's allowing the child to just open the imagination and be who he or she wants to be, deal with the problems through stories, understand that there are infinite possibilities through stories.
Yes.
And that is and as I used to be at so much wonder to see how excited children were when they were just allowed to go in their dimension of whatever imagination they had to. And the first question they would ask us, what do we have to think? Well, you can think whatever you want. And that's where I thought, well, why I do understand, and I have deep regards for every teacher out there who's dealing with so many students. But I think we must do the system, as you said, must also bring in the fact that it has to become a very I think fun task for the teacher, not a duty.
Yes. Yeah. And I so agree. And I just felt so privileged to have worked in a system that where learning was fun also for the teacher. And I think it can be fun because it's almost like you're all learning together.
Yes.
How are we going to do this? You're always asking questions. Where are we going to go with this? And how are we going to do this? And it is opening up. It's a freedom not only for children, but it's a freedom for teachers as well, to be able to almost go back to a kind of like, it gives them this freedom to be the experts that they are, or to be the creators that they are. Teachers are creators, and it is fulfilling. And I think I think that it is so important. And I really relate to this, what you were saying about, the excitement and the engagement of children who are no longer asking, how do I, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to think? How should I do that? Is this the right way? So of course, it doesn't mean that we don't need some of that. There are all kinds of things that kids have to learn that are part of a process and a procedure, and that's okay. But it isn't really that dimension of what really learning is. So, and children have the most incredible propensity to learn, and to share with each other, and absolutely. This idea of it's not for everybody, but I truly believe in constructivism, also in education and social constructivism, that we're always learning from each other. And so I think that it provides a very, very strong model in schools. So yes, not only reformation, but I say transformation in schools.
Yes.
Yeah.
What a wonderful chat it's been. But I want to ask you one last question is, if you were given the liberty and the authority to just restructure the whole program for school just have this dream curriculum for a school, what would it be? How would you do it?
Well, I'm biased. Because I think this curriculum, the primary years program of the International Baccalaureate, is the best that I've probably seen.
Okay.
Because it does put the learner at the center. It's based on inquiry. It's based on a conceptual model, voice for children, independent learning. And I would add that it also needs to be some whole school, definitely has to be some whole school framework for the well-being. So either, you take on something like positive education, or you take on the idea of Sue Roffey's circle solutions, or other things that are like that. So that you're doing it not from a central, let's say, district office. I'm using a lot of American terminology, but or from the Ministry of Education, but school by school. Start right there. You were talking about start with children in their own little environment. We need to do that. Well, start within your school. Start there. Start asking the questions in your school. Make it a very local inquiry into, here's what we do now. What do we want to do better? Where do we want to go? And start building from within your own environment. So those are the things that I would say. Obviously, when you do that, you're looking at other models. You're looking at, programs like positive education or circle solutions to do that. But you're starting, and you're not taking something and planting it there. You're asking important questions. And again, I think that the primary years program of the IB it was for international schools, because when you went to international schools, like I started in Italy, I was in an international school and I was teaching an American curriculum. And I was like, what? This doesn't work. So way back in the 80s, this movement started about, how can we develop an international curriculum? And it's just gone, I think it's 30 years now. And I think in terms of a holistic framework for teaching and learning, it's really strong. It puts the child at the center. It has attributes and characteristics that they're developing. It's very, very strong. So I like to, push that model forward as a way, but you can do it in many other ways. But in terms of well-being, I think you really have to start locally. Yeah. You see, this is why international schools are so strong, is that they don't have a regional office that's saying to them, oh, please, you got to do this. You have to do this now. You have to do that now. The schools have agency.
Okay.
Identifying what the issues are and saying, how do we want to manage and deal with that? So that's tough. It's tough if you're living in a city like London. Yeah.
And of course, well-being doesn't stop in primary school, because I believe that secondary school, the issues that children face there, it's almost like going back to school, going back to that point where they were bullied, going back to that point where they are confused about who they really are, because they're dealing with some new challenges. Absolutely. It has to extend, and we suddenly forget about them because we think they're grown up. And they can just deal with the issues on their own. But it's something that we have to kind of spread throughout the system until the child is an adult and ready to be out there, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so key. So key. I think it's a monumental task, but there's nothing more important.
It's nothing, because obviously these children are then next generation leaders and change makers, innovators, inventors. If we don't nourish that childhood today, we are leaving the world in a very bad place, and that onus is on us. What we do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, Julia, it's been such an honor to just speak to you. And I had I went very deep into this whole discussion, and I was just completely absorbed in what you had to offer and say. And I do hope that whatever we discuss gives people or teachers or tutors or system an insight on the change that needs to be done, the transformation, the restructuring that needs to be done.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the opportunity, because as you can see, I love to talk about it. And again, I just want to finish with saying, I think I've been a teacher, I've been working in schools, and I know what a task teachers have in front of them. So it can't be just it can't be just put on teachers. The burden can't be put on teachers. It has to be a deeper, more systemic discussion. And it's not going to be easy to work through that, because it is a societal problem as well, but it's well worth it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.